Hi, everyone. And today I'm super excited to talk to you about testing with no code and specifically how you and your growth team can as well. So today we're going to be jumping into a bunch of different things, starting off in the intro to no code, what's behind the curtain. So really trying to understand what's possible with it, jumping directly into testing and optimizing, and then how my team and your team can also utilize these skills. But before we get into this, I want to tell you a little bit about me. So, hi, my name is Emily. If we've not met before, I am the head of growth at Voiceflow, and we are a low-code, no-code tool for chat and voice. And beyond that, I've been in growth for quite some time, whether it was at my own startups or my own side projects, to on the B2C side, marketplace, and now more recently, growth for a no-code tool. And one of the things that I've realized all throughout that is that things can be quite challenging, but there's also a lot of excuses and things that get in the way. And while I really love growth, I do really hate the mentality of sometimes there aren't enough resources, or perhaps there are things that are told to us that sometimes make it a little difficult to want to do the things you want to. Whether it's trying to figure out how you can navigate the dev resources that you need, or maybe it's just justifying that this is something that you really want and you're passionate about pushing forward. And the truth about this is that these types of excuses, the resources, the things that get in our way can make it really hard, but it can also make it very rewarding when it starts to come through. So while growth is a challenge, it is something that really ultimately helps you get down to the ability to unlock things, do things faster. But when it works, it's damn fun. And that's really what I want to focus on for the remainder of this presentation, so that ultimately by the end of it, you can leave knowing a little bit more about how you can say things confidently, like, I can build that, aka, I don't need any additional resources. I just need that first idea. Or perhaps even no code, no resources, and quite cheekily, no problem. And so with that, let's jump right in to the introduction to no code for growth. So in growth and marketing and in a lot of startups as a whole, it's really a balancing act in between, do you build, do you optimize, and more importantly, where are you focusing your time to make the greatest impact? And that's really where our funnel comes into play. And while we're very familiar in the growth world of this funnel over to my left side, everything from awareness through to referral, it is important to really think about where you can map the opportunity to really use no code, to really dive into projects that can potentially be unlocked with these tools. So whether you're looking at top of funnel experimentation for lead gen, for example, mid funnel around onboarding or A/B testing, or perhaps even more bottom funnel in setting up community or referrals. And the big thing about this, especially if you are a team of people that do have a series of different technical skills, is that just because it's no code doesn't mean that your team can't code. And more importantly, it doesn't mean that you're against coding or you're against trying to move this into a dev intensive project in the future. Ultimately, where no code can really empower growth teams or just teams in a whole is about opening up and expediting things, empowering your non-technical members to really go beyond that ideation phase and expedite proof of concepts or MVPs or gain that confidence to move it forward. Because while it helps you build, it also helps you build up your team and empower them to think differently, while also breaking free from dev dependencies and backlogs, and ultimately moving towards something that I like to call technical empathy, which is ultimately building that language in between people who are on the technical teams with the non-technical, so that they're speaking the same language and they're focused on thinking in the same way about ideation, building, testing, and realizing that vision faster. And for those of you who may not be on a growth team, a great place to also start is automating everything else, or the things that are repetitive even in your own space. Because when all of those things work, when all is said and done, it really does become quite magical. So with that, let's dive into what's possible. Because it's great to kind of think about what are all the things that are good at the end, but how do we get started? How do we think about what can we possibly accomplish? And for many of you in the room, you are probably familiar with some of these names, whether it's Webflow, of course, to Typeform, to Shopify, to Zapier, all really strong names within the different ecosystem of no-code. But the truth is that there are so many more, and there are so many more that'll ever be able to fit on a slide here. And the beauty of it is that it's very much so a choose your own adventure, because despite kind of how far you are in your no-code journey or how you've been able to experiment in the past, know that there is a tool for just about every level of user, and there's a tool for just about every part of the funnel. So what's the problem then? And I think that's the interesting part of where we're at and where no code has really become this wonderful tool that is not always obvious for people. It's not always easy to now see what was built in the back end with no code tools versus what was once done customized with code. And that is both a challenge and also something that's incredibly exciting, because it not only takes on different forms in the UI and the UX that you and your team can build or that you interact with, but it's also really taken on form in the way that we think and use other products. Whether it is, for instance, Notion, which in itself is a block building system. It's a WYSIWYG, very similar to a lot of no code, but in this case, it's for documentation or for databases. And even in the way that you've seen it, where there are companies now that have been built, whether it is entirely on no code, whether it's part of their tech stack, or whether it is something that is entirely core to what they're going to be building. And even in a lot of cases, you see companies leveraging that, perhaps even for Constellation apps or one-off landing pages, experiments, or even just the background work to kind of get all of that done. And all of these are great examples of not just building, but also for optimizing, which is really how you can leverage no code, not just to build something net new or to create something from scratch, but to really start to scratch and think, how do you optimize and test? And that's really what I want to get into the meat and bones here. So with no code, it is a wonderful tool to not only just unlock different ways for your team to really think about things and understand the foundations and how they all fit together, but it also helps to unlock different parts that we can test, whether it's creating a sandbox by pushing things to a database like Airtable, or perhaps even tracking links. So maybe if you don't know where to start, here are some great solutions for maybe if you're just early on in your career or you don't yet have a project to work on. For instance, if you're tired of having a ton of meetings and scheduling them, try implementing and integrating something like Calendly or Mixmax and trying to identify what are the repetitive tasks that take away from your time so that you can ultimately try to scale. Other ways that may be more common for marketers are, let's say, automating your MPS flow. Someone has been with you for X amount of days, automate an email that sends out and capture that response. And perhaps even when you think about that initial test, how do you take it further? So for instance, if you have that data, you are already collecting things like that. How can you now use that to solve other questions? Like, for instance, let's sub-segment from an MPS. Not sure why customers are churning. Perhaps you should automate out an email to ask what it is that you could have done or how you can improve. And setting those logics, setting that segmentation all starts from that first test of just gathering the data in the first place, of trying it out in the first place, or sending out that initial email. And while in this case, it's a pretty simple, if they're a detractor, send them an email for them to follow up with. There's also great ways of branching off beyond that. So for example, if let's say they're a net promoter, do you want to send them an invitation to, let's say, your community? Or maybe you want to branch off and test to send them to write a review on G2 Crowd if you're like a B2B company instead. So with this, you're not only just planting the seed, but you're creating future opportunities to iterate on. And for those of you who may not be in a growth role, may not be at a startup, may not be in a role where you have that experience, the beautiful thing about no code as well is accessibility and the opportunity to really create that opportunity for yourself, whether it's coming in from the design side in Figma or really trying to go more production with Webflow. There's a wonderful selection of templates and ways that you can get started. And I've even seen some really awesome examples, even on the Webflow side, where, for example, you see someone here who has created its own site to get hired by Vlad or Webflow themselves. And The beautiful thing about this is that jumping into templates doesn't mean that you have to go in and push something to production. It just means that you're flexing that muscle and ideally starting to understand the components and how you can ultimately potentially use that in your own world. And now to kind of really bring that all together, I'd love to show you a little bit behind our playbook, how we use Nocode on my growth team. So like I've mentioned, Nocode doesn't just help with that initial ideation. It's really about trying to take something that is no code and is generating real results, real metrics that we as a team care about, that we as a business need to succeed. And you've seen that not even just with teams all across the board, but also as entire companies, proving that this is a really wonderful skill for people to learn and that people are excited about. For instance, here, Zapier buying MakerPad, for instance, which was a wonderful community of people that were trying to up-level other no-coders in the space.
Motion warning. This section will include a video of scrolling that may be excessive motion for some.
So for us, no-code ranges from everything like just trying to get a pulse on things. For instance, over here, this is a simple automation that we've done from gathering everything from people are saying about us on Twitter to trying to push what's going on from our sign-up flow to our promo codes. And this is our health channel that really just tells us that things are still working, almost like our own status page. Or even other places where, for instance, with our webinars was a brand new channel that we introduced during COVID, like many more. And we wanted to make sure that it didn't mean adding a new channel meant adding a ton of new workload every single week. So we ended up automating what that response looks like, what that CMS looked like, so that no matter what happened, whether we added a new event now or 3 months from now, it was only just one campaign that would ultimately get pushed through our Webflow. All of the different variables from our CMS would actually be what ended up populating into our Airtable to track, which ended up actually generating all of the content that went into the email. So we were able to save tens of hours a week every single time that we had to launch a new thing. And now that's something that lives on, that's its own channel, and one that never needed any extra dev resources, but instead was able to empower our team and open up this new opportunity. And it's not just there that you can try, whether it's, for instance, webinars was a great channel that was proven. Here's an example of one that wasn't, where we wanted to generate more ways that people within our Voiceflow community wanted to go in and find new projects that they could jump off of. So almost like templates. And at first, we didn't want to go and build a brand new place on our site because it was going to take a lot of time. So we started with just Airtable. And slowly but surely, we started to see a ton of people validating that, jumping in, getting excited, that it allowed us to free up sprint time to then go and create our next version, of which ran off the exact same database that we had from Airtable, but instead now lived on our site, was discoverable, was slightly better. And flash forward to now, where we validated the need for that, we've seen that people love it, and now we're able to layer on more searchability, more functional, more things that people were able to directly give us feedback on because we were able to get this up faster. And same goes for even just additional ways that we can view that. And all of these things come from the same database, the same first experiment, and are just other examples of how you can test faster, get that feedback faster, and ultimately keep building off of things in the same way that you would in a normal development sprint, or even, let's say, if something didn't work, you didn't invest all of that time at the beginning. So it's easier to move on to that next. And another great example of even just where to start, even if, let's say, it's a net new thing that you want to try, it's a great opportunity as you start to realize what your tech stack is to now open up more opportunities that you could build upon it. So here you can see is a newer flow that we just created for our job board, where we're able to leverage the same backend that we did with templates, with Webflow and Airtable, and are now able to have a whole different Constellation experience for our users, all done without any additional resources. And that's really what's helped not only our team to really open up new channels and experiment that way, but also it's helped us to rethink what MVP means, our minimum viable product. It allows us to use these tools to get things done faster, to empower the team to really think that way and sprint plan that way, and also still allows us to focus on real results, which is the most exciting part about it, because there's nothing more rewarding than seeing that idea come from something that you're excited about in a meeting to something that you're now demoing 2 weeks later. And that's really what kind of brings us into this last little bit of building your no-code tech stack. So, like I said right at the beginning, there is so many different ways that you can get started. And the first step is really trying to understand, where do you want to impact first? So for me, this is some of the different places that I normally like to get started or think about it, whether it is from kind of testing and your database to your actual design. And these are great places to play around with if you're net new. For us, the biggest things that we try to focus on are really from the data and the CMS side. So what is populating in onto the visuals themselves, and really trying to lean on our own design libraries, as well as pulling from some really wicked creators out there, like Pablo Stanley's Humans, for example. And also really trying to figure out where we now push all that information. So whether it is Webflow, whether it's Autopilot, SendGrid, so for example, our web or email, all of these things are still run in almost the same type of skeletal process of where's the data coming from, what does it look like, and where is it hosted? And it takes on in so many different forms in exciting ways. And for us, there are examples even where we were able to break free of even our own marketing stack, where, for instance, this is an example of back when I was over at Tilt, where we were an easy way to send requests and split payments between friends. But we wanted to test out other ways that we could do messaging, because at first it was all about what are the sexy ways that people can do that with like 5,000 person Cinco de Mayo parties or keggers. And instead we wanted to focus on what was actually the things that people split, like the food that they had, their rent, their utilities. So we created this separate website, aka daveistheworst.com, where we could focus 100% on use cases that wouldn't impact or deter from our core marketing message. So instead of focusing on that, we were able to really see what were those use cases. Like, he always needs a reminder, maybe 10. So use Tilt and we'll remind you for them. And really explaining as well, what is that product? What are different ways and more creative ways that we can flex that muscle? And while that was a separate thing from our site, a constellation, if you will, it was still driving the same exciting things, the same important results that we expected from if it were something that we had put in the dev resources, the opportunity, and extra time into. So even with this core site, which we built on Squarespace and Sketch at the time, because I didn't know what Webflow was when I did this back in the day, we were still able to generate 500 shares, thousands of comments, thousands of new users off a totally different experience. Or there's even other ways internally, building internal tools to scale. So here's an example where we were able to take what is our community, which was growing rapidly at the time. We had started with 50 students across North America and had quickly scaled to about 8,000. But we couldn't onboard them all anymore. We didn't have the headcount. So how would we create this better experience for every new person that became a power user? How would we teach them how to onboard onto our program as an advocate in the same way that you would expect people to want to do that for the product itself? And so in this case, we were a solo growth team. We were our little island and we were trying to save our time. And so in order to do that, we were able to create, again, another isolated experience, this time with WordPress, Wistia, WooCommerce, all being able to track, to actually create and give us the flexibility and freedom to test here, and also still maintain the goal of creating strong, active advocates within our community. And because of this, we saw a 500% increase in the number of people that were actually onboarded and a complete decrease in how many phone calls we had to hop on and one-on-one onboard people. And even on smaller scales, try to think about other ways that you can automate. If, for instance, you're owning email, and are there ways that you can get scrappy? Are there ways that you can test things if perhaps you don't have access to the larger content calendar, or perhaps you're not yet on one of these larger mailing servers? So here's an example where we were able to use, and this was super scrappy, and had I done it again, I would probably choose something else. But we used Yesware as well as our Google Forms in order to get submissions and increase engagement from our community for what awards that they wanted or who they wanted to nominate. And like I mentioned earlier on this, that there are multiple tools for multiple different people. You could accomplish, for instance, this in the exact same way using even different tools like an Airtable form or MailChimp, or swap out any one of these, whether it's your data input, so your form, and whatever is the platform that you're hosting. So with that, when you're thinking about what it is that you want to iterate on, how do you want to build your funnel? The number one question that you should ask yourself is, what is your opportunity? What is the part of the funnel that matters most to you and your team? And then what are the projects that fall beneath that? Because these are going to be your great opportunities to now start to hone in, start to think about what tools, or what's your data, what's your visual, what's your platform for each. And now start to plug and play, because the great opportunity here is really to just get started. And especially if you don't know where to get started just yet, the great thing about this is that there are so many pieces of information. There's so many different ways that you can see that other people are doing things. And by no means do I mean go in and steal somebody else's campaign or somebody else's landing page, but instead challenge yourself to rebuild or rethink, how did those pieces come together? How do you think that you could do, even perhaps a campaign that you've previously done again, however, with a different tech stack? And this is going to be a great way of you not only starting to think about how you can build more using these new tech stacks, but also challenging yourself on unlocking new skills and therefore unlocking new ideas. So in conclusion, when you think about growth in no code, really try to challenge yourself to think about the ways that it unlocks potential to do more with less. That it'll allow you to expedite proof of concepts, your experimentation flow, and it'll really empower you and your team to really stay creative, to get excited. And ultimately, the great thing about this is that it creates opportunity for future growth. So with that, whether you're building something net new, whether you're challenging yourself to optimize something you're currently working on, or maybe you're just getting started and you're getting your feet wet, either way, thank you so much for attending today, and let's stay in touch. If you have any questions, or if you would like a list of any of the tools that I mentioned today, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, and I'd be more than happy to send those your way. Thanks, guys.